The night of silence. The night was cold, and the crowd in the small Hawaiian arena was loud. Young Dwayne sat in the corner of the locker room, his fists trembling, his mind filled with fear. The world outside expected him to fight, to rise, to shine like the champion his father once was. But inside, Dwayne felt small, weaker than the cheers that echoed through the walls. He whispered to himself, "What if I fail? What if they laugh? What if I am not enough?" That was the moment, when silence became heavy. His heart was racing and his body shook. He was not yet the Rock. He was just a young man carrying the weight of dreams too big for his shoulders. Suddenly, the door creaked. His mother peeked in. Her eyes were calm but filled with unspoken words. She didn't tell him to be brave. She didn't tell him to win. She just said softly, "Remember, son, it's not about being the strongest. It's about showing the world who you are." Those words stayed in his heart like fire. The fall before the rise. But life was not easy. Dwayne grew up with broken dreams. Around him, he saw his parents struggle with money. He remembered nights when they didn't know if they could pay rent. At just 14 years old, he watched his family lose their home. The image of his mother standing on the sidewalk, tears rolling down her face, was burned into his memory. He promised himself, "I will never let her feel this pain again." Yet, his road was filled with losses. In high school, he wanted to be a football star. He trained with all his strength. He built his body like iron, believing the game would save him. When he got into college football, it felt like the door to a better life had opened. But fate had other plans. Injuries broke him. Coaches doubted him. Teammates outshined him. One day, after a game, he sat on the bench with his helmet in his hands, sweat dripping down his face. The coach's words cut deep. "Johnson, maybe. This isn't your future," Dwayne wanted to scream. He wanted to fight destiny. But instead, he just sat there, silent, broken. The darkest night. After college, Dwayne chased the dream of becoming a professional football player. He moved to Canada to play in the Canadian Football League. He thought this was his chance. But within months, he was cut from the team. He was just 23 years old, broke, jobless. And with only $7 in his pocket, he sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the empty walls. The silence was louder than any crowd. Tears filled his eyes as he thought, "This is it. I have failed. I have nothing." The weight of failure crushed him so hard that he couldn't breathe. But then came the turning point. In that silence, Dwayne remembered his promise. He remembered his mother's tears. He remembered the vow he made as a boy, to never let his family suffer again. And in that moment, a small voice inside him whispered, "You are not done yet. Stand up." The birth of the Rock wrestling was in his blood. His father, Rocky Johnson, had been a professional wrestler. His grandfather, too. But for Dwayne, it was not just about family tradition, it was survival. When he entered the wrestling world, many laughed at him. They said he smiled too much. They said he was too soft. In his first matches, the crowd booed him. They didn't see a star. They saw a failure pretending to shine. But Dwayne had learned something important in his darkest nights: humility. He didn't fight the boos with anger. He listened. He studied. He worked harder than anyone else. He trained his body to endure pain. He trained his mind to embrace failure. He transformed his fear into energy. And slowly, the same crowd that once booed began to cheer. Kindness behind the strength as fame grew. Dwayne carried with him the lessons of his past. He remembered what it felt like to have nothing. He remembered hunger, shame, and broken nights. And that memory made him humble. He treated the workers backstage with respect. He signed autographs for children for hours, never letting them feel small. Once, during a wrestling show, a young boy in a wheelchair was waiting in the crowd with a sign that read, "You are my hero." After the match, instead of heading backstage, Dwayne walked straight to the boy. He knelt down, smiled, and gave him his wrestling belt. The boy's eyes filled with tears, his smile brighter than the lights above. In that moment, Dwayne knew the true measure of strength was not how hard you hit, but how much kindness you shared. The rise of a giant Hollywood came next, but again it was not easy. His first roles were small, his acting questioned. Many said, "He's just a wrestler. He will never make it." But Dwayne worked silently, like he always did. He stayed humble, learned from everyone, and built himself. Piece by piece, with every role he grew, with every film he inspired. His transformation was no longer just physical, it was spiritual. He became a symbol of resilience, of rising again after falling, of smiling even when the world doubted you. Reflection. The emotional beat today, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is one of the biggest stars in the world. Yet behind his success is the story of a boy who once had only $7, who once saw his family lose everything, who once sat in silence thinking life was over. He rose not because he was the strongest, but because he refused to quit. He rose because he believed in respect, resilience, family, and kindness. And when people look at him today, they don't just see muscles or fame. They see a reminder that no matter how dark the night becomes, there is always a dawn waiting, if you have the courage to stand again. The weight of the spotlight, the applause was thunderous. The bright lights of Hollywood burned against his skin as Dwayne walked down the red carpet for his first big movie premiere. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted his name, people stretched out their hands to touch him. It was a dream come true, or so it seemed. Inside, Dwayne smiled, shook hands, posed for pictures. But the moment the cameras were gone, the silence returned. The same silence he had felt years ago in that small apartment with only $7 in his pocket. He whispered to himself, "Do I belong here? Will they accept me? Or will I fail again?" The truth was, Hollywood was a new battleground, and for every cheer he heard, there were whispers of doubt behind his back. Rejection in disguise, his first roles were awkward. Directors gave him lines that made him look like a giant, who could only fight or shout. Reviewers called him stiff. Critics wrote, "He is a wrestler, not an actor. Hollywood will swallow him soon." Those words cut deep. He had fought so hard to rise above failure, and here it was again. Doubt, rejection, humiliation. After one, film's poor reviews, Dwayne sat alone in his hotel room. The room was large, the bed soft, but he felt emptier than ever. He remembered the football days, the cuts, the dismissals. He remembered the crowd that once booed him in wrestling, and he thought, maybe this is not for me. But then his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. Only a few words. "You always rise, son. Don't stop now." Those words pulled him back from the edge. The decision to change, Dwayne realized he had two choices. Stay as the stereotype Hollywood wanted him to be, or take control of his own story. He chose the harder path. He decided to reinvent himself. He studied acting like a student studies for life. He spent hours practicing expressions, watching films, and learning from actors who had been rejected too. He turned down roles that made him feel empty. Instead, he waited for opportunities that could show his heart, not just his muscles. And slowly, change began. Behind the laughter, his breakthrough came when he accepted a role in a family comedy. People laughed not just because of his size, but because of his charm. For the first time, audiences saw beyond the wrestler. They saw the man, the smile, the humor, the kindness. Yet the transformation wasn't just for the audience. It was for himself. One day on set during a break, He noticed a young girl watching the shoot with her father. She was shy, holding a small notebook. Dwayne walked over, knelt down, and asked softly, "Would you like me to sign that?" The girl nodded. When he handed back the notebook, she whispered, "You make me laugh. When I laugh, I forget that I am sick." Dwayne froze. Tears filled his eyes. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "Then I promise I will keep making you laugh." It was in that moment he realized his movies weren't just entertainment. They were healing, hope, light, the shadow of fame, but with fame came another battle. Hollywood lights were bright, but shadows followed everywhere. Paparazzi chased him. False stories appeared in magazines. Strangers judged his life, his relationships, his choices. One night, after a long day of filming, he returned home exhausted. He turned on the TV only to see a gossip report questioning his career, calling him a temporary star who would fade soon. Anger boiled inside him. He wanted to fight back. But then he remembered the promise he made to himself years ago: never waste energy proving people wrong. Use that energy to become better. So, instead of responding with anger, he responded with work. Early mornings in the gym, long hours on set, endless dedication to his craft. The same humility that once saved him in wrestling now guided him in Hollywood. Family. The anchor in the storm throughout his journey. One thing kept him grounded. Family. He often spoke about his mother, about her strength. He carried her lessons everywhere. He also leaned on the love of his daughters. There were nights when he returned home tired, his body aching, his mind filled with doubts. But then his little daughter would run to him, arms wide, calling out, "Daddy!" And in that embrace, the weight of the world melted. He realized that success wasn't red carpets or awards. Success was coming home and being the man his family could be proud of. Giving back, Dwayne never forgot his roots. He remembered the nights when his family struggled to pay bills. He remembered being evicted from his home. That memory shaped his heart. So, when success came, he used it to give back. He donated millions to schools, hospitals, and charities. But beyond money, he gave his time. He visited sick children, sat with them, listened to their stories. He hugged parents who cried and whispered words of hope. One hospital visit became unforgettable. A boy fighting cancer told him, "I don't think I will win this fight." Dwayne held the boy's hand firmly and said, "You are stronger than you think. I was once broken too, but I stood again. And you will too." The boy smiled. That smile stayed with Dwayne forever. The reflection, the emotional beat Hollywood taught Dwayne that strength is not in standing tall when people cheer. It is in standing firm when people doubt. It is in choosing kindness when the world offers cruelty. It is in giving hope when you yourself are tired. His transformation was not from wrestler to actor. It was from a boy filled with fear to a man filled with purpose. When people now see Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, they don't just see a superstar. They see resilience, humility, and a reminder that true greatness is not about power. It is about lifting others when they feel powerless. The price of greatness. The crowd cheered louder than thunder as Dwayne stood on stage at an award ceremony. The golden trophy in his hands sparkled under the lights. He smiled, waved, and thanked the world for believing in him. But when the applause faded and the night ended, he returned home to an empty living room. The silence felt heavier than the trophy. He sat on the couch, staring at the walls, asking himself, "Am I losing myself while winning the world?" The cracks behind the smile fame had its shine, but it also had its shadows. Schedules grew longer. Days on set stretched into nights. Interviews, premieres, press tours, he was always on the move. Yet behind the smile, there were cracks. His marriage fell apart. The demands of fame strained his relationships. He loved his family deeply, but often he was far from them. One evening, after another exhausting shoot, he found himself sitting alone in a hotel room far from home. He scrolled through pictures on his phone, his daughter's smile, his mother's laugh, moments he had missed. Tears filled his eyes. He whispered, "What good is success if it steals the moments that matter most?" The breaking point, the pressure kept building. One day, he woke up and couldn't move from bed. His body felt heavy, his spirit crushed. He didn't want to train, didn't want to act, didn't even want to smile. He was facing something he had never admitted before: depression. It was the same silence he had met years ago, but this time it was darker. He thought of quitting everything. But then, like before, his mother's voice returned to him. She once told him, "Storms don't last forever, but you must walk through them." He realized he couldn't hide his pain. He needed to face it. Finding healing. Instead of burying his emotions, Dwayne began to speak openly. He admitted his struggles, not as weakness, but as honesty. In interviews, he shared his battle with depression, telling the world, "You are not alone." People were stunned. A man known as the Rock, a symbol of strength, confessing to brokenness. But his honesty healed hearts. Countless fans wrote to him, saying his words gave them courage to fight their own battles. Dwayne discovered that vulnerability was not the opposite of strength. It was a deeper form of it. Rediscovering love and balanced life slowly began to heal. He rebuilt relationships, this time with more patience and humility. He found love again with Lauren, and together they built a home filled with warmth. His daughters became his anchor. One morning, before leaving for a shoot, his little girl held his hand and asked, "Daddy, will you be here tomorrow?" Her innocent question pierced him. He knelt down, kissed her forehead, and promised, "I will always find my way back to you." From that day, he made a choice. No matter how busy Hollywood became, family would come first. He adjusted his schedules, created time to be present, and never let fame rob him of fatherhood. Lessons in humility. Fame could have made him arrogant, but Dwayne carried humility like armor. He never forgot the $7 in his pocket. He never forgot being evicted as a child. Once at a film set, a young crew member accidentally spilled coffee on his jacket. The boy panicked, apologizing again and again. Most stars might have yelled, but Dwayne just smiled, patted his shoulder, and said, "Don't worry, brother, it's just coffee. Let's get back to work." The crew member later said, "That one moment changed the way I saw people. He made me feel respected." This was the essence of Dwayne's greatness. Respect for everyone, from co-stars to crew, from fans to strangers. The strength of giving his success gave him the power to give more. He built scholarships, supported charities, and created opportunities for kids who felt hopeless like he once did. At one event, a young man nervously told him, "I was going to quit school. Then I read your story. I decided to fight one more time." Dwayne shook his hand and replied, "Good, because one more time is always the time that changes everything." Moments like these reminded him why he kept going. It wasn't just movies. It wasn't just fame. It was about impact. Reflection. The emotional beat part 3 of his journey was not about winning trophies or breaking box office records. It was about breaking through personal storms. It was about learning that even giants fall and even the strongest cry. But more importantly, it was about rising again, with honesty, with humility, with love. When the world calls him the Rock, they see strength. But when you look closer, you see something greater. A man who turned pain into purpose, and who teaches us that true power is not in never falling, but in rising every time we do. The empire of resilience, the morning sun, rose over Miami, painting the sky with golden light. Inside a quiet gym, long before the city had awakened, Dwayne was already there. Sweat poured down his face as he lifted heavy weights, his breath steady, his eyes sharp with focus. To the world, he was a superstar. But to himself, he was still that boy who once had only $7. Never forget, he whispered to himself. Discipline is the foundation of everything. That discipline, that hunger, would soon build more than a career. It would build an empire. The dream of $7 Dwayne often spoke about the day he had only $7 in his pocket. Instead of burying that memory, he turned it into fuel. With his business partner, he founded $7 Productions. It was more than a company. It was a statement. No matter how little you start with, you can build something huge if you refuse to quit. Through this company, he created films, TV shows, and stories that inspired millions. He gave chances to new talent, remembering how it felt to be doubted. Once, during a pitch meeting, an executive said, "This project will never work. It's too risky." Dwayne leaned forward, smiled calmly, and replied, "My whole life was risky. Let's do it anyway." And the project became a global hit. Tequila and trust. As years went on, Dwayne expanded beyond movies. He launched his own tequila brand, Terramana. But for him, it wasn't just business. It was family. He traveled to Mexico to work with local farmers, learning their craft, respecting their traditions. He shook their hands, listened to their stories, and made sure every bottle carried not just a drink, but dignity. When Terramana became a success, he didn't just celebrate profits. He celebrated the jobs it created, the families it supported. "Business is not about money," he said once. "It's about people." Leadership by example. In Hollywood, many called him the hardest worker in the room. He showed up before everyone, stayed after everyone, and treated every person with equal respect. One night during a film shoot, the crew was exhausted. Cameras failed, lights broke, tempers rose. Instead of leaving, Dwayne stayed with them until the work was done. He carried equipment, cracked jokes, lifted spirits. The next day, a crew member said, "He doesn't just act like a hero on screen, he lives like one." Humility in victory, though his empire grew, films breaking records, businesses thriving, Dwayne stayed grounded. At airports, he stopped for fans. On streets, he smiled for photos. He remembered being a nobody, and he never wanted anyone to feel invisible around him. Once, while filming overseas, he noticed a group of construction workers watching from a distance. Instead of walking past, he approached them, shook hands, and shared his lunch. One worker whispered, "I can't believe he sat with us. He made us feel important." That was the secret of his greatness. He didn't make others feel small in his shadow. He made them feel seen in his light. Pain as a teacher, yet, even with success, life tested him again. Injuries returned. Filming, action movies pushed his body to limits. Surgeries left scars. But instead of hiding them, he showed them. He told the world, "These scars remind me that pain is part of growth. Don't run from it." Through social media, he shared not just victories but struggles. Early mornings, tough workouts, moments of doubt. He connected with millions not by being perfect, but by being real. The heart of giving back with fame and wealth, Dwayne had the power to change lives, and he used it. He visited schools unannounced, surprising children with hugs and words of encouragement. He helped veterans, honored their service, and funded programs for them. But one story stood out. A struggling father wrote to him, saying he couldn't afford Christmas gifts for his kids. Dwayne didn't just send gifts. He showed up at the family's door with food, toys, and a smile. The father broke into tears, whispering, "You saved our Christmas." For Dwayne, that moment was worth more than any award. Reflection. The emotional beat. Part 4 of his journey was not just about building an empire of businesses and films. It was about building an empire of respect, humility, and kindness. He showed the world that true leadership is not standing above others, but standing with them. He proved that success is not counted in dollars or trophies, but in lives touched. When people call him the Rock, they see a man of strength. But behind that name is something deeper. A boy who once had nothing, now giving everything back to the world. The legacy of love, the stadium lights were bright, the crowd was loud, but Dwayne stood quietly backstage. His latest movie had broken records, his businesses were thriving, and his name echoed across the world. Yet, in that moment, he wasn't thinking about money or fame. He was thinking about his daughters. He whispered, "Everything I do is for them." The father behind the giant of the world, he was the Rock. But at home, he was just daddy. He braided his daughter's hair, sang songs with them in the kitchen, and knelt on the floor to play tea parties. He laughed when they painted his face with glitter. He danced to silly tunes just to see them smile. One evening, his daughter looked at him seriously and asked, "Daddy, are you a superhero?" He paused, smiled gently, and said, "No, baby. Superheroes are the ones who make people feel loved. That's what I try to do." In that moment, he realized his greatest role was not in wrestling rings or on big screens. It was in the small, quiet moments of fatherhood. The wisdom of roots Dwayne never forgot where he came from. He often visited Hawaii, walking along the beaches of his childhood. He remembered the struggles, the nights without a home, the shame of poverty. Instead of running from those memories, he embraced them. They reminded him of humility, of resilience, of gratitude. Once while standing before a crowd in Hawaii, he said, "I may have traveled the world, but I will always be that kid who had nothing. And I thank life for those hard days because they made me who I am." The crowd rose in applause, many with tears in their eyes. Kindness as legacy, his journey wasn't just about personal triumph. It was about what he left behind. He built schools. He gave scholarships. He funded hospitals. But most importantly, he inspired millions of ordinary people to believe in themselves. Fans often told him, "Your story gave me strength when I was broken." And he always replied, "You had the strength all along. I just reminded you." His kindness became his signature. More than muscles, more than fame. It was his heart that people remembered. The conversation with his mother. One quiet night, Dwayne sat with his mother in their home. The room was simple, warm, filled with family photos. She looked at him and said softly, "Do you remember when we had nothing? Do you remember that night on the street?" Dwayne nodded, his eyes moist. "Look at you now, son," she whispered. "But what makes me proud is not your success. It's that you never forgot to be kind." Tears rolled down his face. He hugged her tightly and said, "Everything I am is because of you." The meaning of strength to Dwayne. Strength was no longer about lifting weights or breaking records. It was about lifting people. It was about lifting a child's spirit with a smile, lifting a struggling parent with support, lifting fans with words of hope. Once in an interview, he was asked, "What do you want the world to remember you for?" He thought for a long time, then answered, "Not for being the strongest, not for being the richest. I want to be remembered as a man who made people feel they mattered." The final reflection. The emotional beat this life was a story of falls and rises, from a boy with only $7 to a man who gave millions hope, from rejection and depression to resilience and kindness, from silence and failure to laughter and love. His transformation was not just his own. It belonged to everyone who ever felt broken, doubted, or forgotten. When the world calls him the Rock, it is not just a nickname. It is a symbol. A reminder that no matter how hard life hits you, you can stand again, stronger, kinder, and more human. And so, the legacy of Dwayne Johnson is not in the trophies, not in the box office numbers, not even in the fame. His true legacy is love.